USAID is a formally independent US agency but remains directly subordinate to the US President, Secretary of State and National Security Council. The agency's 2024 budget stood at $36 billion, with a total of $335 billion spent over the last 9 years. USAID's presence extends to over 100 countries, employing more than 10,000 staff worldwide. While officially dedicated to humanitarian aid, economic development, health and democracy initiatives, USAID has increasingly come under scrutiny for its role in funding media and NGOs, allegedly to influence public opinion and domestic affairs in various nations.
According to analysts, indicate that USAID programs were selective in supporting individuals and programs from specific political ideologies. And these programs weren't just being funded abroad, according to a recently revealed DOGE investigation. The U.S. Department of Defense is alleged to have paid the media agency Reuters up to $9 million for what they called social engineering programs between 2018 and 2022. The White House and DOGE have publicized the extensive list of programs that were receiving millions of dollars of grants. The funding included $7.9 million to teach journalists in Sri Lanka how to avoid, quote, binary gendered language. Over $4.5 million went to, quote, combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. $6 million to transform digital spaces to reflect, quote, feminist democratic principles. $20 million for a group related to a key player in the Russiagate impeachment probe, which was ultimately totally discredited. And $3.9 million for, quote, LGBT causes in the Western Balkans.
The BBC's international development arm, supporting media projects worldwide. Funding allocations reached £2.6 million in 2024, aimed at journalism training and content production in developing countries. Critics argue this funding raises questions about media impartiality, particularly concerning narratives that align closely with US foreign policy interests.
Now, critics of this funding arrangement, though, particularly on the Republican side of the wing in the United States, point to this. BBC Media Action was receiving $3 million from USAID in 2023-2024. When Joe Biden entered office in 2020, that was more like $450,000. So they point to that as evidence that this was increased funding during a democratic period in office. It has also, this episode, reopened the debate in this country about international development funding and where it should go, how it should be spent. Some on the what you might call left of centre here in the UK say that actually what's happening with USAID is an opportunity for the UK to fill some of that gap in international development projects worldwide as part of a soft power move, and also to protect some of the media organisations that are suffering as a result of these cuts to BBC Media Action.
In early February 2025, Elon Musk amplified claims suggesting that the US Agency for International Development was funding the BBC. These assertions were based on USAID's financial support to BBC Media Action, the BBC's international development charity. It's crucial to note that even though BBC Media Action operates independently from BBC News, and the funding in question supports global development initiatives, not news operations, the claim created a serious controversy. Following these claims, President Donald Trump and Elon Musk took significant actions against USAID. Musk labeled USAID a criminal organization and announced plans to dismantle it, leading to the furlough of over 10,000 employees and the suspension of numerous aid programs worldwide. This move has drawn criticism from various quarters, including former USAID administrators who label it as a major foreign policy blunder. The situation remains fluid, with ongoing debates about the future of US foreign aid, the role of organizations like BBC Media Action, and their influence.
While direct funding of German media remains unclear, USAID has supported fact-checking initiatives and counter-disinformation efforts in Germany through media NGOs. USAID-backed projects have worked alongside German institutions to combat Russian narratives, leading to concern over government media collusion in information wars. The lack of transparency in these funding flows has sparked debate over foreign influence in European journalism.
Well, a number of world leaders have gathered here at the Munich Security Conference, where the focus traditionally is defence and global security. But the funding freeze at USAID is certainly making conversations with some of these lawmakers and politicians here. From the Europeans' perspective, they are acutely aware that USAID is helping support a number of independent media organisations, not so much in Western Europe, but especially in Central and Eastern Europe, in places like Georgia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. We know that some of those media organisations are now facing a quite uncertain future as this 90-day funding freeze continues, but there are also questions hanging over an organisation known as Radio Free Europe. This is a US government-funded media organisation headquartered in the Czech Republic capital of Prague. They are not officially funded by USAID, but they are funded by the taxpayer, and some influential voices, including Elon Musk, have said that they should have their funding cut. We do know, of course, that if this funding freeze goes ahead and some of these independent media organisations face the chopping block, it could be left to the Europeans to try and fill the gap. Right now, the European Commission is the world's second biggest contributor to humanitarian aid after the US. The government of Germany is the third biggest. So there are questions right now and discussions happening with some of those politicians around if the US backs away from USAID funding of media organisations in Europe, will the Europeans indeed come to fill the gap? Trent Murray for AnewZ in Munich.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused USAID of financing opposition media to undermine his government. Hungary has since banned foreign-funded NGOs allegedly engage in political interference, calling the funding a tool of external manipulation. USAID's funding freeze under Trump was welcomed by Hungarian officials, who claimed it exposed hidden Western influence over their domestic media. However, with USAID's funding freeze, many media outlets in Hungary are now struggling to find alternative sources of financial support, further threatening their ability to operate independently.
Journalists at Club Radio are feeling the impact of the recent decision to freeze aid. The station was set to receive US funds for new equipment and an expanded second studio. But those plans are now on hold after President Trump's administration stopped those grants. The station relies on a single broadcasting studio. If it fails to operate for some reason, it will go silent. The station depends heavily on public donations, but losing foreign grants complicates its future. The freeze affects more than just Club Radio here in Hungary. At the investigative outlet Atlátszó, editors are currently discussing how to fill a funding gap left by USAID cuts. The managing editor said to local media that the outlet lost up to 15% of its budget with the freeze, forcing it to seek new donors and boost crowdfunding.
90% of Ukrainian media is reported to have received USAID funding, with over $6 billion allocated in 2024 alone. USAID's media support in Ukraine was positioned as countering Russian disinformation, but critics argue it blurred the line between journalism and strategic influence. With USAID's funding now frozen, Ukrainian media outlets that have long depended on foreign grants are scrambling to survive, facing an uncertain future amid war and economic instability.
The Ukrainian Institute of Mass Information estimates there was a 90% drop in advertising revenue for online media outlets over the first year of war, which left many of them scrabbling to find alternative sources of funding. Now, 9 in 10 Ukrainian media outlets survive thanks to grants. 8 in 10 specifically receive help from USAID. And with this freeze, the Institute of Mass Information conducted a survey to find out the damage, and the answers are extreme for Ukraine. 90% of outlets are expecting difficulties, 60% may stop operating or be forced to significantly downsize, and only 20% say they will be able to carry on as before the grants were frozen. And that's forced them to turn to their readers, to Ukrainian businesses, to apply to European projects and UN schemes. The Kiev-based corruption investigations outlet Silstva has lost 80% of its funding. It says it's now looking at cutting its frontline reporting and war crime reporting. It said the money had freed it from relying on oligarchs, politicians or the state. Ukrainian investigative outlet BIHAS exposes official corruption in Ukraine. It's lost 2/3 of its funding from USAID. Its founder predicts 2 months before it has to stop cutting staff. Reporting on the situation inside Russian-occupied territories in the south and east of the country is RIA South and RIA Melitopol. Its chief editor, Svetlana Zalizyetska, said that if such media outlets as ours cease to exist, the entire international community and Ukrainians will not be able to receive information about what's happening in the occupied zones. The world will receive information from there only from Russian propagandists, not Ukrainian journalists.
Now, of course, Russia, as I mentioned, will look to try and get involved. Russia will look to become, to somehow leverage this opportunity to gain a foothold in the Ukrainian information space via proxies and partners and third parties. Also, the European Union will be very active. Donor countries, individual European donor countries, also non-European partners, the Japanese, for example, the Norwegians. We can expect them to also be involved in this process. I would imagine as well that there'll be a good chance that in time, perhaps after a 90-day auditing period is over, or however long it takes the Americans to reach decisions, some of this funding may even return, perhaps not via USAID, perhaps via other channels.
USAID has been a long-time backer of media and NGOs in Georgia, funding opposition-friendly outlets and civil society groups. The Georgian Dream government has repeatedly accused USAID of interfering in domestic politics, particularly during election cycles. USAID-backed organisations have played a key role in protests and political movements, sparking concerns over external influence.
What I want to say is that Georgian media receive foreign funding. They receive this money not only from the USAID, but from other donors. So I don't think that this shrinkage of funding will affect Georgian free-willing media to such extent that they can stop their activity, or somehow their influence on public opinion will be reduced. As far as I know, key media outlets are continuing their operation, and we have to see what the results of the U.S. government audit of USAID activity will show, and how this organization will continue to operate.
In total, over 700 media organisations, 300 media-related NGOs and over 6,000 journalists have received funding via USAID. On February 6th, the US government cut off funding for the New York Times, Politico and Associated Press, citing misuse of public funds. Supporters argue that USAID's funding safeguards independent journalism against authoritarian control and misinformation. Critics contend that USAID has blurred the line between media support and political manipulation, using press funding as a tool of hybrid warfare. The Trump administration's move to defend media projects has reignited debates over the true nature of foreign-funded journalism. With funding now suspended, USAID's role in global media is facing its biggest challenge yet. The question remains, was this agency defending democracy or shaping the news to serve its own agenda?